Once upon a time, in a quiet village nestled between mountains and rivers, a girl named Lian was born under the light of a crimson moon. The elders whispered that such a birth was an omen, a sign that she would walk a path unlike any other. While other girls in her village learned to weave silk and recite poetry, Lian watched the world with restless eyes, yearning for something beyond the narrow life expected of her. Her father, a once great soldier, had set down his sword to raise a family, but the weight of war never left him. Even as he tilled the land, his hands bore the scars of past battles, and his dreams were haunted by ghosts of the fallen. From the moment Lian could walk, she followed him, mimicking the disciplined movements he tried so hard to leave behind. At first, he refused to train her. "War is a curse," he said, his gaze dark and distant. "It is no place for you." But when her mother was taken by sickness in the dead of winter, something within him shifted. Perhaps he saw the same grief, the same fire in Lian's eyes that he had once carried. He began teaching her in secret, guiding her through the forms and footwork that had once made him a warrior. "Strength alone is not enough," he warned. "War does not make heroes. It only takes and takes." But Lian did not care for heroism. She wanted to be strong, not just for herself, but for her father, who had already lost too much. And so, she trained harder than any boy in the village, her hands blistering against the hilt of a wooden sword, her body aching but unyielding. She knew, however, that no matter how skilled she became, she would never be allowed to fight. That was a man's duty. Her future had already been written: marriage, children, a quiet life within the walls of a home. Yet when the Emperor's summons arrived, demanding that her father return to the battlefield, she knew she could not stand by. He was too old, too tired. If she did nothing, she would lose him too. That night, she made a choice. Lian knelt before the family altar, her hands trembling as she traced her fingers over the worn wooden carvings of her ancestors' names. The war had come to their land, and her father, aged, frail, yet still bound by duty, had been called to fight once more. She could not let him go. He had served his time. It was now her turn to bear the burden. That night, she cut her hair, donned his armor, and rode into the unknown. The battlefield was nothing like she had imagined. The first few battles nearly killed her. She was slow, uncertain, and the weight of her father's sword felt foreign in her hands. But fear became her greatest teacher. Fear made her faster. Fear made her ruthless. She trained relentlessly, watching and mimicking the seasoned soldiers around her. With each battle, her movements grew sharper, her strikes more precise. She climbed the ranks, her victories earning the respect of her fellow soldiers and catching the eye of General Wei, the kingdom's most formidable commander. Yet something was wrong. After one particularly bloody battle, Lian found herself staring at a man's face, twisted in agony, eyes empty. She could have sworn she had seen him before. But no, he had been the enemy, hadn't he? The whispers began that night. At first, it was only the wind, strange gusts that carried murmurs she couldn't quite make out. Then came the shadows, flickering shapes on the edges of her vision, slipping between the bodies of the fallen. She dismissed them as exhaustion, but as the war waged on, she realized the phantoms were watching her. She tried to ignore them, tried to focus on Wei's voice, his unwavering commands cutting through the chaos. Under his guidance, she became more than just a soldier. She became a leader. When she was with him, the whispers faded. He saw her potential, trusted her instincts, and one night, after a near-fatal ambush, he discovered her secret. She was ready for him to cast her out, but instead he swore to protect her. Wei saw in her the same relentless fire that had once burned within him, the same hunger to prove herself against a world that had already written her fate. She, in turn, saw in him the battle-worn man behind the armor, the weight he carried, the ghosts he never spoke of. In the stillness between wars, they found solace in each other's presence, their conversations shifting from strategy to whispered confessions under moonlit skies. They fought side by side, saved each other more times than either could count. They spoke of a life beyond the battlefield, a quiet place where swords were sheathed, where blood was no longer spilled. But war does not grant dreams so easily. On the eve of another campaign, their unit sought shelter in an abandoned temple, its stone walls long forgotten by the gods. There, before the altar of a nameless deity, they made their vows in secret. A soldier and a general, bound by something greater than war. In that moment, there was no bloodshed, no phantoms, only the promise of a future. The final battle came sooner than expected. The enemy struck under cover of night, their forces pouring through the valley like a relentless tide. Smoke choked the air, screams filled her ears, and the world dissolved into chaos. Lian fought through the mist, her blade a silver blur, but something was wrong. The phantoms were everywhere now, twisting through the haze, whispering, laughing. The faces of the dead blurred with the faces of the living. Her soldiers' armor looked like the enemy's, or was it the other way around? Wei saw the change in her, saw the wildness in her eyes, the way her blade no longer hesitated. He called out to her, but she did not hear him. The whispers drowned him out, the phantoms urging her forward. Lian turned, eyes blazing, seeing an enemy rushing toward her. She lifted her sword and struck. Wei gasped, staggering as her blade pierced him. The mist cleared. The battlefield fell silent. She caught him as he fell, his blood soaking her hands. "Lian!" His voice was barely a breath. His fingers brushed her cheek, the same way they had on the night of their wedding, and then he was gone. The war ended that day, but for Lian, there was no victory. The whispers did not fade, the phantoms did not leave. They had never been ghosts of the enemy. They had been her soldiers, her friends, her love, and she had slaughtered them all. Days later, as she prepared to leave the battlefield behind, she learned the final cruelty of fate. She was carrying Wei's child. The life they had dreamed of would never come to be. She pressed her hands to her stomach, numb with grief. The weight of what could have been crushed her, suffocating her beneath the ghosts of her past. She had dreamed of holding their child in a peaceful world, of watching Wei smile as he cradled their future. Now, all that remained was silence. That night, she walked alone into the mist. The shadows embraced her, whispering lullabies of forgotten warriors. Step by step, she let them take her, vanishing into the fog where the dead would cradle her forever. And the whispers, for the first time, fell silent. Thank you for joining us in the world of Twilight Fables. If you enjoyed this tale and want to hear more stories like this, please subscribe and hit the notification bell for more.